sermon series, The Journey Begins, for this fall. Last week we started with one question. Do you remember what it was? It was, who am I? Who am I? Today's sermon, who do you say? Yeah, who do you say? Robert Frost, the poet, in his poem, you've probably heard this, The Road Not Taken, offered these words. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, but having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. Whenever I read that section of it, I always think that's the standard traveler's dilemma right there. Choice. There are choices and differing directions placed before many of us in different times of our lives. We stand at the junction where the roads split off and go in their own direction. In the beginning, some of these roads seem too similar, and we don't know what to do, which way to go. They both just want to make a choice. Both of the results seem about the same. Other times we can see what's being presented, and we stand there trying to decide what we should do, and then take our first step on the road which appeals to us, because that's our choice. Our choice. Mr. Frost noted that we looked down one of the roads as far as we could, and then perhaps seeing nothing that particularly called out to us, we venture forth on the second road, not really knowing where it would lead. And the journey always holds surprises for us. Whenever we're going down, when we made a decision and we decide to go this way or that during our lives, we encounter things that we come across like broken pavement on a sidewalk, or dirt, or mud. Sometimes there are obstacles. Maybe some are sandy, some are grassy, and on it goes. We're even presented with different scenery and vistas, differing opportunities, and differing lessons are learned. For Jesus and his disciples, this must have been the way things were. The disciples decided to follow Jesus. They've been living their lives as best they could, but something was missing. Something was broken in their lives. And Jesus calls them. He calls them to come and become those who would bring the words that would capture the hearts of the broken and alienated people, of both the arrogant and the indifferent folks. And they followed. They followed. But not without encountering many hazards as well as opportunities to learn and serve. But this morning, I think we should consider Moses. Moses, who knew that, who would know that on that mountain in back of it and beyond, that Moses would stumble across God. I bet he didn't get up that morning and think he was going to stumble across God, Jay. It just happened. No, I don't think Moses knew. Because he wasn't looking. He wasn't looking. And I think he wasn't looking for God because he didn't want to be found. He was already living a self-imposed witness protection program because he was hiding out from the authorities back home, who had his name and likeness plastered across post offices, from Goshen to Cairo. That's what he had. Because Moses had let his temper get the best of him. Call it righteous indignation if you want. Call it an act of justice. He was protecting one of the downtrodden who was being oppressed. But Pharaoh's police force called it murder. And even the adopted grandson of the king couldn't get away with murder, so Moses had run for his life. And he ran across the desert. He ran with blood dripping from his hands, or at least it felt like it. I'd like to think that his dreams were filled with a nightly reenactment of his crime of passion. They had to have been, at least for a while. Maybe as the years passed, the hot sun and the dry dust eroded those memories enough so Moses could honestly forget about it. Maybe he forgot what he did. It was a long time ago. Maybe he forgot where he came from. Maybe even he forgot who he was. I think that was his goal. And this rescued Hebrew baby boy who grew up in the palace of the greatest king in the known world wanted to forget everything except how to follow sheep up a mountain. His whole life revolved around following sheep now. That's all I am, he probably thought. All I'm good for, following sheep through the dusty middle of nowhere, where nothing happens and no one goes except for God. God will go there. Take off your shoes, said the bush. A bush. I'm telling you, it was a bush. A bush spoke, or a voice came from the bush. And the burning but not consumed bush. Burning but not consumed. Burning but not consumed. Maybe that's what drew Moses towards it. Maybe after all those years of burning and being consumed, Moses himself wanted to see how it was possible for something to burn and not be consumed, because he burned over the anguish of his actions. Or maybe it was the promise. Maybe that's it. Maybe it was the hope that caused him to step aside long enough to have his whole life turned upside down and inside out. I've come to help, was the promise from the bush. Or the angel in the bush, or the voice that wasn't an angel or the bush, but seemed to transcend both. The voice that said, my heart is broken with the pain of my people. So I've come to help, to set them free. Great. Great. Moses must have thought, great. Woo-hoo, go get him. Great. But what's a bush going to do against the might of the nation like Egypt? Silly little bush. I know you're fireproof, but come on. I've come to help. Moses hears the voice from the bush say, what really hit him like a ton of bricks. I've come to help. I'm sending you. I'm sending you. Say what? That was probably what going through Moses' voice. That if you're from the 70s, anyone else remember that? Say what? Because the what had to be real high at the end. James, I know you're old enough to remember. Yeah. Jay, not so much? No, okay. I mean, Moses is probably saying, I just follow sheep. I'm not a hero. I'll be with you, says the voice as the flames crackle in the silence while Moses chews on this bit of news. I'll be with you. And who are you? Moses timidly questions, wondering if that not consumed thing applied just to the bush. Because they're going to eat me alive. Who are you? Who are you? Friends, friends, our Bibles tell us Moses made his way back across the desert. I'm going to, spoiler alert. Did I forget to say spoiler alert? I'll tell you right now, okay? I'm going to tell you the ending to the movie. All right, Moses made his way back across the desert to the land he'd abandoned. But this time, he had a mission. An impossible mission to be for sure. I mean, he'd beaten Tom Cruise by far on this one. All right, that's a more modern. Okay, more modern. I mean, you have to wonder if every step of his way back to Egypt, that name rolled over and over in his mind every sandy step he took. I am who I am. That's what the voices said. I am who I am. Who are you? I am who I am. I will be who I will be. Tell them, I am sent you. I am will be with you, the voice said. Moses must have shook his head at the strangeness of the thought, and then maybe he noticed a hawk flying low in front of them, and it wheeled and circled on the hot desert winds as he was lifted. And at one point it seemed to have a glint in its piercing eyes. It looked at Moses as though it knew a secret Moses had almost forgotten or had just been told. And Moses' burden seemed lighter for a moment. I am will be with me. Moses lifted his eyes to the hills and then the sky above, and it seemed his direction was mapped out with orangey red clouds. And he remembers he said, God, forbid it, Lord. But now, the God who seems so present in creation, who worked through all of Moses' doubts and hesitations and promised to be present with him throughout this saga, now calls him to move, to make the journey into the valley of death and come out on the other side. Tell them I am sent you. That's my Moses story. But I wonder what it's been like for you. Think about all the roads where you've encountered and the decisions that you've had to make, the pathways you've had to choose. I'm pretty sure most of you feel pretty good about those decisions, believing them to be the right ones, giving all the information you had at hand at the time. They were good decisions and you've stood by them. And I think good for you. That's a blessing. But I find that there are times in my life when I stood at the crossroads and wondered what I should do, and I made a decision. But even now I continue to wonder what things would have been like if I had followed the other path. Choices. Many choices seem to come to us, little choices and monumental choices, friends. What and whom should we follow? If left to our own devices, we wander helplessly in circles, just wandering around in circles. Whereas Jesus, in our Bible, he set his foot on a path and he kept his focus. One night he prayed to let the things be different, his path be different. He said, let this cup pass from me, O Lord. And yet quickly it was followed with a statement of commitment to the very end, as he said, nevertheless, not my will, but yours. Your will be done. Jade shared with us, Peter, hearing Jesus' statement about going to Jerusalem where he would suffer at the hands of the religious and secular authorities, tried to intervene, claiming that those things could not happen. That's not our plan. And Jesus' viewpoint, Peter became an obstacle, and Peter was frightened, and he could only see the danger. Jesus saw his pain, the pain Peter was going through with this, and says, "Get behind me, Satan." And I get that that's not a nice thing to call Peter. But this is the path set for Jesus. And Jesus even tells him, each disciple, each one of you will have your own path. And Jesus, just as Jesus had whenever they were fishermen or tax collectors, Jesus calls them to continue to follow him. Jesus calls each of us today to follow him, to be willing to place our trust in him, to take up the cross, face forward and focus on the glorious goal. But there are questions in our minds. Can we let go of the painful path we might be on? Can we take a step on that pathway of hope and salvation? Well, friends, it's your choice. It's always your choice. Choices. The end of Robert Frost's poem says, "I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." Friends, I want you to know, to be reminded today, in all of your choices, the burning bush says to each one of us, as it did to Moses, "I am, will be with you." Will be with each of us. Thanks be to God.